Hello and welcome to Tête-à-Tête here on France 24. Our guest this week is Mike Penrose. He's a veteran humanitarian worker. He was executive director of UNICEF UK. He was CEO of Action Against Hunger, and he's currently a special advisor to the government of Ukraine on the Food from Ukraine humanitarian program. And he joins us from Chelmsford in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for being our guest this week.
Thank you very much, Mark.
You've been very involved in Ridne. Ridne is a Ukrainian food consortium made up of small and medium-sized food producers. It was created at the onset of the Russian invasion to provide food for Ukraine, and it now supplies up to 70% of Ukraine's humanitarian food market. What makes it different from the traditional aid agencies or initiatives you're very familiar with?
Ridne was a fascinating initiative because at the beginning of the onset of the war, a lot of the aid agencies turned up and they have big global supply contracts. So they buy their food from large-scale traders, countries like Turkey, Egypt, etc. And food was being brought into Ukraine, which is a bit crazy considering that Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. What Ridne did is that they pulled together all the small to medium-sized producers in the UK, or a large number of them. We have up to 20 farms and 11 food manufacturing plants. And these are small businesses that otherwise would have gone out of business because of the invasion. They pulled them together and they allowed them to trade at scale to actually meet the needs of large-scale aid organisations. So now, the latest numbers is over 80% of all food aid being delivered by aid agencies in Ukraine is sourced in Ukraine, purchased from small to medium-sized producers and delivered locally. And that means that the people who are most vulnerable from the economic shock of the war were the ones that can now benefit economically from, unfortunately, the aid that needs to be delivered.
Right. Right now, there's also a move in which you're very involved to begin to play a road abroad, first and foremost in Africa. On April the 10th, Ridne launched a regional food distribution hub in Accra, the capital of Ghana. Why would an initiative from a country at war and still fully at war move and try to replicate it abroad so far away in Ghana?
I think it's twofold, and this is fascinating. First of all, I think those with the greatest empathy with people suffering, particularly in Africa at the moment, are people going through their own trials in Ukraine. And it's an incredibly generous country, and the government is very outward looking. But also, as we try and reconstruct Ukraine's economy, we need to focus on their biggest assets, and their biggest asset in Ukraine is agriculture. But the model as well, we found works really, really well for small to medium-sized producers anywhere in the world. So the concept very much is that for regional humanitarian programs, we're looking at opening 3 hubs in Africa. For regional humanitarian programs, we can pull together small to medium-sized producers in Africa so they can also start delivering at scale as well, because individually they wouldn't be able to access large-scale aid contracts because they're not big enough. But if we pool their resources and act in a sort of cooperative way, in a consortium way, we can give these small to medium-sized producers a chance to access the markets. But for commodities that really aren't produced at scale in Africa, but that are needed by aid programs, the majority is things like wheat flour, sunflower oil. All of these commodities are produced at scale in Ukraine. Soya, for example, is another one. And these complement the things that we find locally. So the program that we've established in Ukraine works equally well in Africa. And one of the biggest things we're struggling with is massive cuts in aid budgets all around the world. And what this does is ensure that the value chain of aid is affecting them or helping the maximum number of people. When you buy the food, it goes to producers who need it in Africa or in Ukraine. And then when you distribute it, it goes to the most vulnerable people who are dependent on food aid. At the moment, in the traditional system, the money you spend on food just gets lost into large agro industry. It doesn't help those who need it most. With this model, small African producers benefit, small Ukrainian producers benefit, and the food aid can be delivered at scale in the places it's needed most, like Sudan, Somalia, areas of the Sahel, Democratic Republic of the Congo, countries that are really suffering.
Right. Why would it be more efficient than the World Food Programme or other major NGOs? I mean, you were involved in one NGO called Action Against Hunger. Why is this a better model, according to you, based on your experience?
We hope to be working with all the, and we're already talking to most of these big agencies as well. The reason it's better is because it used to be in the past, you'd have $10.
Recording in progress.
You'd have $10 for Ukraine and you'd have $10 for Sudan. Nowadays, with the aid cuts, you've only got $10 for both. So what we're doing here is we're making sure that the maximum impact from procurement is had. So as I said before, if you were spending 6 of those $10 on buying food and 4 on distributing it, if you just buy it on the open market, it probably goes to a spot trader. A large part of it gets taken out before it reaches the producers of the food. And a lot of the producers of the food are large agro industry. So again, money will go, because they're floated on stock exchanges, etc., will go there. What this does is make sure that the money that's spent on the food goes directly to people who would otherwise be vulnerable. It takes people out of that loop of vulnerability and really increases the value of the aid that's being distributed, rather than just average procurement.
You mentioned massive aid cuts. Obviously, the Trump administration essentially terminated USAID. Western governments are also cutting aid. What kind of an impact does it have on food distribution, especially in the midst of the Ukraine and Iran wars?
Yeah, there's been huge cuts at the moment in aid. So a lot of the budgets have been cut by up to 40%, sometimes 50%. I think the World Food Programme is saying that it's looking at a 40% cut this year. This has affected all aid organisations. Obviously, we know about the US cuts, but most European donors are pulling away and are diverting a lot of money to defence. Now, we do need the money in defence as well, but it is having a dramatic effect. What this programme does is it ensures that the money is spent most effectively, so you have a multiplier of impact, and hopefully it will offset some of these cuts and allow money to be used more effectively, and the most vulnerable people will receive it. So I think, in an era of diminishing amounts of money, where we have increasing need, so in places like Sudan, up to 40% of the population now are dependent on aid, but aid budgets are being cut, and particularly on food aid, aid budgets are being cut. This ensures that you get absolute maximum value out of the money we have, and it helps both the countries that are supplying the aid, which are crisis affected, like Ukraine, and those that receive it. So there's never been a more critical time. Need is growing, budgets are being slashed. We need to make sure the money is spent really effectively.
Speaking of money, you've been involved in a dispute between the British government and Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich after the war in Ukraine began. The government forced Abramovich to sell Chelsea Football Club. The £2.35 billion from the sale are currently frozen. The government says it can only be used for humanitarian purposes in Ukraine, nowhere else. Abramovich has refused, and he recently said he would set up a foundation that would spend the money, yes, for humanitarian purposes, but not only in Ukraine. You are going to oversee that foundation. Do you think this will solve the issue? Because it is a very sizable amount of money at a time where humanitarian aid is getting scarcer and scarcer.
Yeah, there has never been a bigger time for this foundation. I was the person chosen in the middle to be a neutral party. So once the legal disputes between the government and Mr. Abramovich are solved, hopefully the money will then come into the foundation that I'm setting up. We've applied for registration. We have an amazing group of trustees, including a former UN Under Secretary General, a person who used to manage a multi-billion-pound foundation in the US, and a well-known human rights activist. So we have the right people in place. We have the infrastructure prepared, the investment structures prepared to receive the funds. We just need the government to break this deadlock and release the money to us. This money could make a huge difference. Particularly in today's world, it's no underestimate that it could save hundreds of millions of lives over a long period of time. We're just calling on government to break this deadlock and release the funds. Humanitarian programs are global. The impact of wars around the world are global. Limiting it to one geographic boundary doesn't actually even help countries like Ukraine in the best possible way. A crazy situation, if it was contained only to Ukraine, was if a child was to be displaced in Ukraine and cross the border and seek sanctuary in Europe, we would have to stop helping them the second that they cross the border, as opposed to treating the actual problem itself. So most people I talk to who know what we're trying to do support the idea of a global foundation. But as I'm not involved in legal processes between Mr. Abramovich and the government, we're sat here, we're ready to go, and we're just imploring people. The difference that this money could make would be enormous.
So why do you think the UK government is insisting that the money needs to be spent solely in Ukraine? If you're saying from a humanitarian standpoint, it doesn't make sense. Why are they threatening legal action and insisting on this? Because obviously they think this should be a payback for Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
I think they have they've got their reasons. They talk also about agreements with other groups in terms of how the money should be spent. But I just think it's a lack of political courage, to be frank. I think that it is a complex legal issue, but with the right political will and political courage, I have no doubt it could be solved. And it needs to be reinforced that this is an independent foundation. It would have no political leanings. It would have no connections to the donors of the money. It would be independent, and it would spend the money only on humanitarian need. And every humanitarian expert we talk to says that limiting it would reduce its effect even inside countries like Ukraine. It's an enormous amount of money, and the need has never been greater. I just think we need some political courage to break this deadlock and ensure that the money comes to the foundation.
Mike Penrose, thank you very much for being our guest here on Tête à Tête, and thank you all for watching it. Stay tuned for more news on France 24.